Is Hot Science with Richard Clarke. I'll be talking about the week's top news in science, technology, and medicine. Welcome, and let me give you a preview of today's uh, stories. The top story is the climate economy is about to explode. And the bill that's authorizing this, the IRA, is going to have a much bigger impact, according to this writer, than people think about. And in technology, there is now a breakthrough battery charging technology that's able to charge the average EV battery in just 10 minutes. And so when these chargers are deployed, then range anxiety will be a thing of the past. And in the environmental story, we have COP27, the international meeting that is starting next month. And from the smaller countries, they will be pushing the loss and damage agenda to get more funding to be able to for them to deal with the problem. And in materials, I have yet another graphene story, and scientists discover that they can use graphene electrons and do a better job pulling water molecules apart. This will be a development that really boosts the hydrogen energy source. And in space, the story is about the smashing success of the NASA asteroid strike and the fact that it made a big change in the orbit of the thing it collided against. In biology, it turns out that tiny frogs and giant spiders do very well together. And there are species of spiders and frogs around the world that have a mutually sustaining relationship. It's hard to imagine spiders keeping frogs as pets, but that's kind of what it's like. And in the human area, I have a couple of stories. The first is about self compassion. Self compassion is being as nice to yourself as you might be to a friend. It turns out that that's really good for you. And then something that I didn't realize, it's actually a new understanding of the brain. And for most people in their mid 40s, the brain starts rewiring itself. And I think for us, understanding what is going on with our brains is probably a useful thing. And then in medical, I have two stories. The first is that scientists have developed a cure for diabetes using ultrasound. So no drugs, no injections, just an ultrasound treatment. And the next story is that signs of dementia may be detectable 9 years before diagnosis. So if you or somebody that you love starts to show preliminary signs of diabetes, it's good to get them to the doctor and see what the case is. There are things that they can do now that slows down the onset of diabetes. There was a drug we talked about a week or so ago that can slow the onset of Alzheimer's rather by 30%. So if you find it out 9 years before you're going to have Alzheimer's, you can gain another 3 years of mentally competent life, which I think is very worthwhile. Anyway, so now on to the story. The climate economy is about ready to explode. Last month, Credit Suisse published a research study about America's new climate law that pretty much no one noticed. And what they said is the Inflation Reduction Act uh, is going to be even more important than we've recognized so far. The IRA, they say, will have a profound effect across industries in the next decade and beyond, and could ultimately shape the direction of the American economy. Now, the first thing is the IRA might spend twice as much as Congress thinks. Congress, the CBO estimates that the spending is going to be 374 billion. That turns out just to be an estimate. The heart of the program are things like incentives for electric vehicles and zero carbon electricity, and those programs are not capped. They are an uncapped tax credit. So it means as long as you qualify, then you can get the money. And they think this is going to be much more successful than the CBO thinks. And they think because of that, by the time the bill is through, instead of 374 billion, it will amount to 800 billion worth of federal spending. And you know, when federal spending happens like this, there's private money that also is spent in this area. And they think that will about double the spending, so that in the next decade in the US, there will be $1.7 trillion spent on environmental issues. And that's enough to change things. And they say with this, then the US is poised to become the world's leading energy provider. We're already the leading provider of oil and natural gas. Did anybody know that? And that the IRA will further enhance the advantage of all forms of electricity and energy, and that by 2029, the US and solar and wind power could be the cheapest in the world. And the thing about this is that now, with this kind of federal backing, the big corporations are going to see environmental issues as different than the way they've thought about them before. So far, they think about them in terms of risk mitigation. What can we do to not have our company damaged by the environmental issue? And they say all of this federal money is going to change the way they think. And they will be worried now about missing out on the economic opportunities of the energy transition. And so they're going to be really focused on it. And uh, so it means, from the investor's point of view, clean energy is now the safe, smart, government backed bet for conservative investors. that's going to change the world also, because there'll be more money going into it. And I think a big deal is that the number of Americans working in climate relevant industry is going to explode. You know, when 20 years ago, if somebody was getting ready to go into jobs, they would look in technology companies and things like Google, and those look like they're a job that had a future and you could do good in the world. And it's going to change because the jobs are going to be in the energy related areas and climate related areas, and it's going to bring in a deluge of new people, new talent, new people thinking about it. And the Credit Suisse forecasts that the fight against climate change is going to change more in the next 4 years because of this spending than it has in the past 40. And they say the great story of our lives is just beginning. Welcome aboard. Sounds like marketing copy to me as a marketing guy. So, what do you think about that? I think it's good news.
Where's all that money coming from?
The money is coming from the US taxes.
Yeah.
Half of the money is coming from the US taxes. They say that'll end up being matched by focused investing from the private sector. So half of it is from us, from the bill that the Biden administration got through that's called the Inflation Reduction Act, which turned out to be the biggest climate bill that has been passed in America.
I'm all for it anyway.
Yeah. As long as the US dollar is the world's reserve currency, this kind of spending is, is acceptable. You can get away with it. But if ever there's a change in that, it won't be so easy to spend these amounts of money.
And I would say if the US is the main provider of energy all through the energy spectrum in the world, then that's going to mean the US currency remains strong.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, I'm glad to hear one of these stories that is a good news story and is really saying the news is going to be better than we think.
It'll be interesting with regard to the US providing all the energy. The European Space Agency is working on something that at the moment is still theoretical, which is space-based solar power.
That's right. I've read stories about that for 50 years. And in the stories, one thing that sometimes happens is, they have to transmit it down to the earth somehow. So imagine this beam with gigawatts or terawatts of energy that something happens and it doesn't hit the right place.
Well, apparently Solaris is soon to be approved.
Yes.
And they expect that they'll have the technology by 2040, but you're right. It's probably pie in the sky.
But as I say, the science, I've read about it in sci-fi stories, and the sci-fi stories have to have some kind of drama in them, It's not pie in the sky, it's power in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And
but it's interesting that the European Space Agency is actually working on it.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And certainly it has potential. There's a lot of solar energy out in space.
Well, and it doesn't cover farmland.
That's right. That's right. Okay, the next story is a technology story, and it really is a battery charger story. And this is a multi-federal agency funded program has developed a battery charger that can recharge a standard electric vehicle battery in just 10 minutes. And this is a substantial improvement in charging technology. And such swift charging then helps alleviate what's known as range anxiety, defined as the fear basically of running out of power before you can recharge your battery. Because if it is easy and fast to charge the battery, then it's not going to be as much problem, especially for most of the vehicle use, which is around in town. And you know where the chargers are in town, and it's all accessible. Uh, this is one of the issues that limits EV adoption. Uh, it's related to it in range anxiety. It's also related to it in cost, because what will end up happening because of this development is there will be a big percentage of the future EVs that come out with the kind of smaller batteries you need if you only need a range of 100 or 150 miles around town. Smaller batteries means the prices are going to drop on the EVs, so there'll be more available. Also, smaller batteries means that was concern about the elements like lithium and cobalt running out. There not being enough to make all the batteries that we need to make for the EVs in the next decade. And again, smaller batteries means fewer materials that are needed, and it means less stress on the environmental resources that are used to make it. So this is going to be a real change in the EV market, and it's going to bring the cost down and the availability up for EVs and solve a resource problem all at once. And this is more research and development that was paid for by the US government. Good job, government.
Well, talking about charging, when I was in Holland, we didn't stay in a hotel, of course. We stayed with my brother, which is a residential area, kind of an upscale area to be sure. But there is not enough space for people to have a house and a garage. So everyone parks their car on the street, even though you have more or less your own spot. Although they're not guaranteed that way. But anyhow, what I want to say is that on the end of each row of where cars are parked, there were two spaces where they had a charger. Would you believe that?
Yeah, wow.
In a residential neighborhood.
Mm-hmm. So here they dealt with the problem of the neighborhood, which is people don't have garages, so they don't have chargers. And
exactly.
That's great. These people are thinking. And to me, that shows the kind of changes that will be happening to be able to accommodate the change. Interesting news, John.
Yeah, well, I just happened to notice. I mean, nobody talked about it, but it's just there, and I saw, geez, they're not parking meters, And then I looked a little closer, and sure enough, they're chargers, and
Uh-huh.
yeah.
So the next story is about the upcoming COP27. This is the next International Climate Conference, and it's happening next month in Egypt, and uh, the, there's going to be a renewed battle at this conference over the financial support that rich companies provide for developing nations to help them deal with the consequences of climate change. And what these poorer countries are asking for is to deal with, quote, loss and damage funding for developing nations. And for them, this is a big issue because they feel like time is running out. And what they want to see is the creation of an international loss and damage finance facility. And this would be funded by the big rich companies. And the UN Secretary General says, quote, wealthier countries bear a moral responsibility to help poorer nations recover, adapt, and build resistance to disasters. And continuing with what he said, let's not forget that 80% of the emissions driving this type of climatic destruction are from the G20, the rich countries of the world. And the Paris conference, there was an agreement in this area in 2015, and the rich countries agreed to contribute $100 million, $100 billion, excuse me, for a few decimals, to the poorer countries, but they did not meet their pledge. They ended up ponying up almost $90 billion, but that's still short of the $100 billion. And the problem has gotten greater now. And of course, the rich countries at this conference, they want to focus on implementation of the promises that have been made so far to reduce emissions, to adapt to climate change, and to provide money to help. But again, the small countries are concerned about their ability to survive this. They are saying, and again, quote, we are reaching our breaking point. And just to show you the kind of pressures that are going to be there, John Kerry, who's the US head climate ambassador, I guess, is pushing back on this request for financing for loss and damage. He's saying the focus should be on supporting mitigation projects that are things that will limit the damage in the future, rather than dealing with the damage that these guys already have experienced. If you ask the people in Pakistan, I think they would rather have the money to help them deal with all the floods than they think that's more pressing than preventing the next flood. Anyway, it shows the kind of range that will be here, a range of issues that will be in this next conference. And we will really see at the end of it how serious the nations of the world are about dealing with these problems. And one of the ways that we'll see it is by the agreement that is made about this kind of funding for the less wealthy countries.
So, just sending money to another country if they have deficiencies in things that affect climate change not going to do much good. I don't think we should maybe send help in kind. Like for instance, if they have flooding problems, we should engage people that are really knowledgeable in how to control these things. Have been successful in the past with that kind of work, and to actually go there, they can hire local labor, but experts to develop, the protective measures that are needed to control floods.
Uh-huh. Now, and that could be the kind of things that John Kerry is talking about. I would suggest that, the smaller, less wealthy countries of the world, I believe that they complain, though, about solutions that are imposed on them by the rich countries. And they say, why won't you listen to us? We're the ones going through this. Why don't you listen to us and give us the help we think we need? And I think that's a real legitimate point of view.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that, if rather than giving a poorer country money to build a dam, we should say, we will come and we will build your dam for you. And that way, the money can't be siphoned off to buy arms and things
And
like that.
and our companies get to make all the profit.
Well, yeah.
We're like that. Oh boy, more money for the rich companies.
Yeah, but if we don't do that, I mean, I don't trust these kind of governments to not spend it on arms or private jets or things like that.
If they're, for me, I think if they're faced with the issue of survival, that they will worry about that before they buy themselves a private jet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But anyway, this discussion still shows the kind of problem that they would have to be having at the conference, because if we think about things like this, they do too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like the US built the Panama Canal. These projects to prevent flooding could be done on the same basis. You use local labor, Western expertise, and get it done.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, sorry to be a Debbie Downer about it all, but there's absolutely no way, even if they had given all the money they said they would give, that it's actually going to be more than a drop in the bucket. I mean, the floods in Pakistan just show you how monumental, weather extremes are going to affect the whole planet. Oops, sorry, I've got this computer on something not stable.
But if you are dying of thirst, having a drop in the bucket is pretty good.
Well, there you go. The glass is half full for you, which is good, Richard.
Well, I'm a half full kind of guy. Okay, let me proceed along with a material story. Usually the material stories just put everybody to sleep, but I'll still do it anyway. And this is, I haven't had a graphene story for a few weeks. And what scientists have learned is they can use graphene to make electrodes. And first they were able to use these electrodes to get better understanding of exactly what is going on when you're separating water into hydrogen and oxygen. And then it looks like that they will be able to make the most effective catalysts to be able to do this kind of separation, which makes it the hydrogen economy with green hydrogen much more possible. One of the things that they found out with these graphene electrodes is that they are permeable only to proteins. That means that this allows the separating the resulting protein from the hydroxide ion when you're doing electrolysis. And because the graphene makes a layer, then the process naturally separates hydrogen and oxygen much more efficiently than any way they've been able to do it before. And so graphene electrodes provide three different properties that they never have found before. The first is that, again, only proteins permeate the membrane. And so that allows for real efficient separation. And it's small, it's just one atom thick, and it can sustain the kind of high electrical forces that you need to get efficient separation of hydrogen and oxygen. So these graphene electrodes turn out to be a key element in the hydrogen component of the green economy.
I wonder if Volvo's using them for their big trucks.
Not yet, not yet, but they will. The other place that will be using it is, Australia wants to become a leader in energy production, and they have all this sunlight, and they want to use the sunlight to make them a hydrogen hub. And so the Aussie will use them too. Okay.
How does sunlight make it easier to produce hydrogen?
They still use in this case, they're using sunlight to generate electricity, and you need electricity to break the strong bond between the hydrogen and the oxygen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And again, the thing about the graphene is you can do it effectively, and the structure then helps the separation.
Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm.
Now, the story, the astronomy story for the week is about the DART spacecraft. By now we know that it was successful running into the asteroid, and it took them several nights of observation to be able to determine how effective it was. And what they found was that it did alter the orbit. It was hitting one asteroid orbiting around another asteroid, and it hit the smaller asteroid. And what they found is that the impact shortened the asteroid's orbit by 32 minutes. That was 3 times the impact that they expected to have. And so they're excited about how effective it was. And then, they really, for the first time ever, humanity has changed the orbit of some celestial body. And there are people busily worried about all of these asteroids out there. I think we've already located about 1 million of them, but the planetary defense people are interested more in being able to nudge an asteroid out of the way than they are, say, hitting it with a nuclear weapon and exploding it. Because if you break one asteroid into 100 pieces and they're still going the same way, then you're going to be hit by 100 big meteors instead of one giant one, and it's not that much better. And so what they want to be able to do is to nudge things out of the way. And this showed basically that this is a reasonable, plausible, possible idea. And so this is kind of proof of concept of nudging the asteroid out of the way. Though to do this, what they really need is early warning time, because you want to get it early, then it doesn't take as much energy to nudge it out of the way. And so now the focus is on the work needed to identify more of these almost innumerable space rocks out there, to be able to identify the ones that are threatening, and also on those to figure out whether they are big solid rocks or just big piles of gravel, because those are different kind of meteors. And I guess if you're trying to defend yourself against asteroids, you need to know what you're defending against. So this is a move forward. The way it was before this is the scientists figured if they found one of these objects, there's nothing that we know how to do to prevent it from hitting the Earth. And now we have a way to protect ourselves from some of these kind of problems.
One of the stories about the dart said that the Gulf of Mexico was only a 14-kilometer.
Yes.
It didn't sound very big, an asteroid to cause such massive damage. I guess it depends the speed they're.
Well, it depends on the speed, depends on the mass. I think it depends on, as I say, whether it's a big rock or a bunch of gravel.
Mm-hmm.
But I think you're right. 14-kilometer big doesn't sound very big. I think if we figured out what the mass would be, you would be surprised how big that was.
Well, and what is it? Force equals mass times acceleration, right?
Right. And you could argue that this experiment was a great example of F equals ma.
Mhm. I think that keeping track of the trajectory of all these asteroids, that's kind of a computer problem, because
Right.
computers,
Well, yes.
computers deal really well with multitudes of things.
Right. But that's certainly true. But the problem is they haven't located them yet. So they've located, I think, about 1 million of them. But there's a bunch more. I don't know how many more.
Mhm.
I'm sorry our astronomer isn't here, because he might be able to tell us how many. Okay, so let me move along. And the next story, I will show you a picture of the star of the story. Here is a tarantula, probably a Peruvian tarantula, with his pet frog. And it's kind of interesting that they have gone together. The kind of frog is a microhylid, and this is the group of what's called narrow-mouthed frogs. And there are 735 species of these frogs around the planet. And what they have found is in Peru and in India and in Sri Lanka, they have found big spiders, tarantulas, then that have a relationship with these frogs and uh, kind of keep them as pets. It turns out the tarantulas are very capable of killing and eating a frog of this size, but they use chemical recognition to recognize these particular frogs, and probably these kind of frogs are not very tasty to eat because their skin has toxins on it, and maybe that's how the relationship began. But the frogs benefit the spiders because the frogs, among other things, eat ants. Ants are their main prey, and ants are also really attracted to spider eggs and will destroy and eat the spider eggs. So having your pet frog around, he'll eat the ants, and you have more spider babies. It also turns out it's good for the frogs too, because the frogs are protected from other predators. They're not going to mess with that tarantula. And then also the leftovers from the spiders eating is perfect food for the tadpoles from the frogs. So the tarantula refuse ends up being good for the frog tadpoles too. And the scientists say discovering different species of these frogs on different continents is a sign of convergent evolution, you know, where nature comes up with the same solution at different times in different places. When this happens, then it's a good solution, is what that means. And they expect to find other kind of tarantula frog relationships and other relationships like this once they look. So I know people who have pet tarantulas. I guess I know people who have pet frogs. I don't know anyone who has them together as a pair.
Yeah. One of my roommates in vet school had tarantulas on the dining room table, and you know the flat-sided fish bowls. And they feed them premium ice, and the premium ice are bigger than the frog, like judging by you know, in comparison to the size of the tarantulas.
But that was not a relationship of mutuality.
Absolutely not.
And to me, part of what is interesting about the story in another way is it's just another sign of natural systems with different kind of animals doing things that are important for other animals. And so it's some kind of way that's just a sign of the way these natural systems work together and cooperate together and make them all stronger.
Yep. How many people have leafcutter ants in their gardens in the Ajijic area? Now it isn't animal to animal, it's animal and plant.
Yes.
Because the leaves are to feed the fungus, not like the ants don't eat the leaves.
Well, I have had the problem, I think, a couple of times, and it's really funny because over a period of a couple of days, the plant is just entirely stripped. The plant next to it is left there. They only like some of the plants some of the times. And then so far, the experience we've had with the leafcutter ants is after they're through doing the job, the plant has this wonderful period where it grows all the new leaves and then has new flowers. So the leafcutter ants may actually help in some strange way.
Yeah.
They sure disturbed my wife, who is trying to take care of the flowers and having them, all the leaves eaten off.
Yeah, sometimes overnight,
Yes,
just depending upon how industrious they are.
yes. And she went out one of the nights when we had the first attack, and she said it was really eerie because it seemed like there were a million ants in the space, and it's like the ground was just moving.
Yeah, all the trails.
Yes.
Yeah, but I didn't realize until this year that that the ants were eating the leaves themselves, that they were feeding a fungus.
Oh, right. They're just gathering stuff for their garden, for
Yeah.
their farm, or rather, their fungus
Yeah, that's a
farm.
better way of putting it. Yeah.
And then does the leafcutter ants eat the fungus?
Oh, that's what they feed the queen. I think that's what they eat themselves too.
Mhm.
A mushroom farm.
Exactly right.
It's really quite fascinating. We have had ants and we looked at them as pests, and they are in a way because they interfere with what we're doing, but they actually can, make your sidewalk collapse. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
it's totally amazing.
Okay. The next story is about us and people. And it turns out what they call self-compassion makes you a better person. And this was a study done by a psychologist, Christian Neff, and she created a course in her college to teach people self-compassion. And more than 100,000 people have gone through the course and given it good reports. And so she did clinical trials of the people who went through the course and found very positive effects on mental health conditions like depression and anxiety, as well as on physical health. And the studies found out that these effects persisted even a year after they took the course. So what they learned was something that was beneficial for them in their ongoing way. And she identified three factors, components in self-compassion. The first is self-kindness. The next is common humanity. And the third was mindfulness. And self-kindness here means that you are nice to yourself. You're warm towards yourself when you suffer or mess up, rather than judging yourself harshly and criticizing yourself. Uh, some people identify this as being as nice to yourself when you run into trouble as you would be to a friend. You know, you're not going to berate your friend. You're going to tell them it's okay. That happens to people. You'll get over it. You'll learn. So self-kindness, then common humanity means you remind yourself that everyone suffers or messes up or deals with this kind of stuff. And mindfulness here means you're not over identified or under identified with your painful thoughts. Mindfulness is acknowledging what's going on, here acknowledging they're painful, but you also recognize that they're just thoughts and they'll go away. They're not your whole being. So if you're, uh, many people, when they hear about stuff like this, are skeptical. And so they've did yet more studies. And one of the things people are skeptical about is they say, if you're too nice to yourself, you'll be self-indulgent and you're not going to get anywhere. And that if you're nice to yourself, what's going to be your motivation to improve? You need to keep learning and getting ahead. And this has the idea that beating yourself up somehow helps you learn better. They've done research on this, and it turns out the research says that that's not true. People, what they did more studies with self-compassion and other approaches, and they found out that the people who had this self-compassion were actually more able to learn, more able to change than people who were given positive messages about themselves, you're great, affirmations of your skill, or given no message at all. And that the people who had the self-compassion after they had had a problem showed the greatest motivation to improve after the initial failure than the other groups. And so more self-compassionate people are more likely with other people when they make mistakes to apologize and make amends to others, and they're more able to acknowledge when they've made a mistake. And this means they're able to take more responsibility, not less responsibility for their actions, and they're able to learn more effectively. If you feel shame instead, it just shuts down your ability to learn. And the other thing about self-compassion is it's a skill, and it's a skill you can practice and learn and do better at. If you want to practice self-compassion, the first part is just becoming mindful about what's going on and how you're feeling and what you're feeling. And the next step is to understand that the kind of suffering when you make a mistake is just a part of the human condition. And then the third step is to offer yourself this self-kindness. Say to yourself, what I would do for a friend who is in the same condition. Ask yourself that condition. I wouldn't berate them the way I'm berating myself. Be nice to yourself. And that if you do this, then there's evidence that your own mental well-being improves. And they saw with this kind of mental well-being improvement, there is also an improvement in physical health. And this is something that when you learn to do, it makes your life better for the rest of your life. So be nice to yourself. Okay?
I think that's what Trump is doing.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Okay, there's this guy who has been president for 4 years. Did you remember him? His name is Trump.
I don't think that guy's got the first part. I don't think he's got any self-awareness.
Uh-huh.
I think
Maybe
you're
I'm
right.
wrong. I don't know.
I think you're
I'm
right.
Canadian, eh?
That's a
I
cop
think-
out.
Yeah, I do think.
Oh,
people-
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I do think people are different because from raising kids, I know that some kids thrive on praise and others thrive on challenges.
Oh, no, 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 no. Mm-mm-mm. You might be interested in watching her videos. I was fascinated. I went down the rabbit hole with it. So she talks about it's easier when she talks about father and son. So just because you're both together with yourself. So she says the first thing is the teenager comes home from high school failing math, but he wants to go to college. So the nasty critical father says, you know, oh, that's terrible. This is awful. You know, you're an idiot. You don't know anything, which is apparently the way we often talk to ourselves. Whereas the compassionate father says, oh, how are you feeling about that? Oh, this is terrible, but it is a problem. You want to go to college, and so we're going to have to do something about this. And how can I help you? Can I get you a tutor? Would it help if you know, we had the neighbor's son over? You know, suggesting things to do, which yeah, when you first hear about it, it seems but she was talking to teachers, and for years they were trying to build up the kids' self-esteem. Good job, well done. But she said the problem with that is to have good self-esteem. Like, she was talking to these teachers and said, hey, Josie, if I told you that your teaching was average, how would you feel? So to have good self-esteem, you have to be above average, but that doesn't work out. You know, you've got a big group. Not everybody can be above average. Anyway, if you're interested at all, I recommend a deep dive into her videos. I was fascinated.
Mhm. Mhm.
All right.
Well, it certainly seems to me that with the self-compassion, you are more able to make a mistake and then look at the mistake and learn from it and adapt your behavior. And the critical father would make me want to just run away and avoid it altogether. Okay, now continuing, it turns out our brains undergo what they call a great rewiring, starting usually in the mid 40s. And what they have found in studying the brains is the brains start to undergo a radical rewiring that changes how the brain networks work together, and the brain becomes more integrated and connected uh, in this part of our life. And this makes changes in our cognition. They, they think these network changes come about because in the middle 40s, as the metabolism starts to change and run down, the brain reorganizes itself to deal with the reduced resources and aging brain hardware. And so it turns out that in the teenage years and as the young adult years, the brain seems to have numerous partition networks that have a high level of interconnectivity. This is the time in your life when you're learning things, and these local networks are the brain's mechanisms for learning something and becoming skills at it. And then around the mid 40s, this starts to change and the brain becomes less connected within these separate networks and more connected overall within the total brain. And so the brain is less regionally specialized and instead broadly connected and integrated. Uh, this has some effects on cognition. Some of them are ones we know about. Older adults tend to show less flexible thinking, because uh, we don't have all of these individual separate little brain networks that are able to do the kind of specialized thinking. It's not all bad for the brain. Tasks that rely on well-practiced processes are less impacted by age and may even increase slightly. An example of these might be vocabulary, which gets better with age, or general knowledge that gets better with age. I would also say, if you look at a musician who is old and they physically may not have the capability to play with the virtuosity that they did before, but the music is wonderful. So the brain is a resource hungry organ, and the adult brain is about 2% of the body weight, but requires 20% of the glucose supply. So the brain is an energy hog. And as our bodies slow down, the brain becomes less efficient and less able to get the energy that it needs. And so the brain, which is this reorganization and plasticity machine, reorganizes itself so it can operate with the lower energy level and still do its good job. We can, of course, slow this down by a good diet and regular exercise and a healthy lifestyle. But it's interesting that they're finding out more about the way that brains change as we age. And so, how are you dealing with your aging, changing, more efficient brain?
What did you just say?
Okay.
That was under the table.
Well, maybe we will get to that, Susan, in my last story. We'll get to part of that. Anyway, so they're learning more things. The other thing that occurs to me, of course, is as they discover these things, then, maybe they will end up discovering more ways to either slow down this change, if the change we think is negative, maybe if the change is positive, because old people, there are a lot of things that we are better at, especially those things that require judgment. So anyway, we're learning more, and we'll find out later what it all means. So now I have a couple of medical stories for today. The first one is that scientists are developing a cure for diabetes, type 2 diabetes, not using drugs or injections, but using ultrasound. And this was research that was done by a team that was led by GE researchers and had many university researchers involved with it. And they studied 3 different preclinical systems to be able to do this. And the findings show that they were able to do something that's really a significant milestone in the field of bioelectronic medicine. Who's heard of bioelectronic medicine? don't everybody raise their hands at once. And this is new ways to treat chronic diseases like diabetes using electronic devices like ultrasound that modulate the body's nervous response. So it works on the nervous response. GE Research has been working on this particular project for the last 6 years, and now they have shown that ultrasound can be used to prevent or reverse diabetes, type 2 diabetes, in the studies that are preclinical. Now they have to start working on human testing. First is just the human feasibility trials, then they will become the rest of it. And the use of ultrasound could be a game changer for how we treat things like type 2 diabetes. What they have found in their testing is, again, they're able to reverse diabetes. And what they found so far that works is regular short treatments, 3 minutes a day, resulted in long-term maintenance of normal blood glucose level. So to me, it sounds like this will end up being some device you can buy and use yourself in your own home. If you need to do it 3 minutes a day, you're not going to go to the doctor's office, to the ultrasound specialist. It'll end up being some device you use yourself and learn how to position and control. And to be able to control something like diabetes with ultrasound, this is just going to be one of a number of areas. I know they're using ultrasound to deal with brain conditions and a bunch of other conditions. And one of the things that's nice about ultrasound is it's a non-invasive procedure. And I'm all for non-invasive medical procedures.
And-
Where's the ultrasound applied for type 2 diabetes?
I don't know.
They didn't say.
They didn't say.
I
I
think
assume-
that you think that the gadgets that you're talking about probably carry the manufacturer's name of GE on there?
They had 3 different devices. I don't think they were all GE devices, but maybe they were.
Yeah, well,
Do you think this is going to be like Dr. Bones on Star Trek, where you wave the tricorder near the pancreas and the
That's right,
beta
maybe.
cells and the islets of Langerhans just all wake up?
Oh, that's right. It's interesting that they say this works on the nervous system rather than the organ. And I don't have any idea what that's about.
Maybe stimulating the cells. You know
Yeah,
why it
maybe.
doesn't work on type 1?
Uh-huh.
Do you
Well,
know
like-
why?
I have no idea.
There aren't any beta cells. They're dead.
Ah, okay. I think that would be a good sign of how it's working. And,
So type 2 is that the beta cells are still there. It's just that they're not doing their job.
right. And one of the
They're in
things,
the pancreas.
Sorry?
they're in the
Isn't
pancreas.
pancreas?
Yeah, it isn't the whole pancreas, because of course, most of what's going on in the pancreas is making digestive enzymes, to break down that steak that you did on the barbecue. But the islets of Langerhans are like raisins in raisin bread. So the beta cells are located in those islands. And I guess Langerhans must have been perhaps, John, maybe he was Dutch. What do you think? Like
no, I think it's German.
Oh, he's German. Okay. Anyway, I guess he was the guy that saw them under the microscope.
Yeah.
I will. Thank you. Hey, Taboo. Did you have a good hike? Oh, sorry, I'm not on mute.
Okay. And the last story is that signs of dementia may be detectable 9 years before dementia occurs. And so for some people who go on to develop Alzheimer's, they start to show effects of it up to 9 years before they receive a diagnosis. And this opens up the possibility for screening programs to be able to identify them. They found this out by looking back at patients' histories. And when they did this, it became clear that a number of them were showing signs of cognitive impairment years before the symptoms became obvious enough to give a diagnosis. And so what they found is that people who went on to develop Alzheimer's scored more poorly than healthy individuals when it came to several kind of tests: problem-solving tasks, reaction time, which would be fairly easy to test, remembering lists of numbers, or memory. And according to this study, they were also more likely than healthy adults to have had a fall in the previous 12 months. And so they also went on to warn that people should not be unduly worried if they are not good at recalling numbers, because even some healthy people are naturally better or worse than other people. But they would encourage people who has any concerns, I would say, about any of these tests, or notice that their memory or recall is getting worried, to speak to their doctor about it and get further evaluation. We know from recent articles that we've talked about in this series is there are now medications available that slow the onset of Alzheimer's by 30%. And say you could find out you had Alzheimer's or it was pending and you're still in very early stages, that through this kind of treatment, you could gain years of normal life, which if you've seen anybody go through this Alzheimer, those years of normal life are precious.
I wonder people that are undergoing those tests and they're being so-called forewarned, they may start worrying about it and hurry up to the condition that they fear.
I don't know. Could be. Certainly, there's one problem that they have with some areas of medical tests. There's this well-known problem of false positives causing people a lot of emotional strain. Maybe this would do the same thing. But for me, I think if I was in the Alzheimer pipeline, I think I would like to know it. And if there's something I could do to delay it, I would sure like to do it. For me, my mental acuity is something that I prize more highly. If I would rather have my body crap out than my mind crap out.
Well, they're both pretty pretty important. Anyway, see you again, Susan.
Okay.
Yes, good to see you, John.
Yeah, I think of you almost every day when I drive by your property.
Ah, well, maybe January.
Okay. All right. Well,
Anyway,
see-
it's good to see you. I think today there were at least 4 of these stories that I think are pretty revolutionary. And, it seems like we have 1 or 2 of them every week. We're in an amazing period.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for keeping track of them. I
Oh.
was disappointed in the battery story that it didn't go into the mechanics of it. It seemed to gloss over the top of it. Maybe
Right.
because I've been reading a lot of Will Lockett, and he goes into NASA's new battery and how it's going to maybe dethrone Elon because Elon's having so much trouble with the 4680s, scaling them up to be manufacturing them fast enough. So he's delaying production of the latest EVs that Tesla's doing.
Irony is that Musk doesn't make batteries himself. He buys batteries from Panasonic and KTEL in China.
I thought
I thought he had a big,
was having his own battery factory, and that's where they were doing the 4680. And that the big deal is that the cylinders are larger, and so that you need fewer of them, but they can't scale up the production to manufacture them fast enough.
yeah,
But
I
that's
thought he
not
had,
him, that's somebody else.
I thought that he had battery manufacturing. I just read an article this morning that said BYD does, but Tesla doesn't. The article must have been wrong.
I thought there were these are what are called gigafactories, and he has one in the US, one in China, and he's trying to do one, I think, in Germany.
I know he didn't, when he started with the Roadster, he certainly wasn't manufacturing batteries. That was on a Lotus Elan slider. Anybody ridden in a Roadster?
Yeah, all right.
Unbelievable. Gerhard, the guy who owned it, said, "Are you ready? Are you ready?" And I'm like, "Ready for what?" And then it's just no noise, nothing, like 0 to 60 in what is it, 5.6 seconds or something like that. Just
Boy,
nuts.
takes your breath away.
Yes.
Literally.
Yeah, one slammed back in the seat is the.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And
Yeah,
no
I've never
noise.
ridden in another sports car, so.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you all for joining me, and we'll be back next week with more amazing stories.
Yeah, well, thanks for all the
Thank
work.
you very much, Richard.
You're certainly welcome.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See you all.
Adios. Adios.